I also work as a production designer and set designer, and I think that informs a lot of my approach to making films, because I got really bored of buying cushions and arranging them, and I wanted to like design the world that like my stories would be in. Yeah, that's, unless you want to sit for now, yeah.
Oh, my turn. Hi, I'm Loelle. I'm from Suriname. Suriname is a small country in South America, above Brazil. I always tell that because nobody knows where it is. And my film just the view was shut down. The name of it is Serio. It's part of a series called Serio. And at the moment I live in the Netherlands because that's where I study film now at the University of Artinian. And yeah, that's about it.
She's lying, that's not about it. I'm Marlene Goldman, and I made the film. It's a short film, Torching the Dusties, and I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. And I realized that no one reads academic books about Alzheimer's or dementia. And I got really sad when I finished a big academic book, so I decided to become a filmmaker. And I made a short film about dementia, and I'm still in age studies and medical humanities. And so this film that I did was about the experience of macular degeneration and vision loss. And it's by one of Canada's most, like it's an adaptation. I steal stories shamelessly, so beware. So it's an outlet story that I adapted.
I'm Laura Moss. My film is Neurotica, playing in the graveyard shift block. I also have a production design background. That's kind of special effects, makeup, prosthetic makeup, and then production design was how I kind of got into film. I love this festival. This is my second time here with a film, and currently working on a feature that is hopefully shooting in the fall of this year, a horror film that's a female Frankenstein adaptation about two women kind of accidentally co-parenting a reanimated child.
Hi, I'm Teja. My film was in the queer horror block Tea Parties Are for Babies. I'm a senior at NYU Tisch, and I'm about to make my thesis film, which is going to be about sort of fandom culture and fan fiction, and sort of sex symbolism and teenage sexuality, which, you know, fan fiction was a huge part of my coming of age sexuality. And Tea Parties Are for Babies is an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland with a cult and some other dark things such as cannibalism. And yeah, that's me.
That sounds really cool. I'm Toby. I was here with the feature The Deeper You Dig. And I come from the history of acting, and when I hit about 40, I just started making my own films with my husband and our two kids, who were 6 and 11 when we started. So I like to mention them because they're females, and now they're 16 and 21, and we've made 5 features together. And this was our first horror, and we're making more. We've just about to start shooting our next.
I am Artinian. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I co-wrote Destruction Makes the World a Little Brighter with my friend Alexandra, who's a tremendous actress, and I kind of do a bit of everything. Kind of like I work in Toronto, and I have like 9 freelance jobs, and I use that stuff to supplement my own work, which is the best way to do it. Like I do a lot of corporate video editing. I'm second camera for a bunch of people. I also work as a grip with like IATSE, which is like the big union, and there's a huge industry in Toronto for that kind of stuff.
It's different perspectives.
Yeah, huge.
I have a question for all of you. Can you tell us about like certain themes that you're very interested, very dedicated to bringing to the screen, like certain subject matter that is very important to you?
I guess I'll just
Sorry,
start.
go ahead.
So since our dynamic is that we are an actual family who acts in our films and is also the crew, for us, it's been very important and easy, because it's there, to highlight the family dynamic, often mothers and daughters. But I don't always play my kid's mom. But so I like exploring family dynamics, and I guess all of our films have had something to do with that, and losing family, gaining family.
I touched on this a little bit before, but I'm definitely interested in coming-of-age narratives and sort of rewriting coming-of-age narratives. There was this article I read a while ago that talks about like the menstruation monster complex, which is, the idea that when a girl gets her period, she becomes a monster. Period blood is disgusting, But I see that as sort of like a fun thing to explore and kind of reclaim in the horror genre. The idea of women discovering their sexuality and even women being just as capable of evil as men, I think that's something that I'm really interested in exploring in my work and in my sort of hyper-feminine style that I'm trying to develop.
We also are very dedicated to bringing to audiences.
I guess as I really am committed to kind of exploring social ills, and so I didn't even know that I would end up in a horror festival. I see myself as a satirist, like Atwood and Gulliver's Travels, and obviously things like The Parasite, like that film is also a social ills horror film, and my favorite films are like Get Out. So when I started out, and I am, as I said, sort of rooted in University of Toronto, a literary professor, and I specialize in the Gothic, and so I teach courses in that, but I'm really interested in disability studies and age studies, and so I wrote a big book about the history of dementia. And so one of the huge topics in my work is about how do we think about the life course, both from like the kind of horrors about being born and Rosemary's Baby and the Cronenberg films about the beginnings, but also I'm realizing that there's a tremendous weight on the horror of endings. And so it's really, at some point as an academic, I became a mother, and I realized we're sort of ruining the life course for our children by gothicizing the later part of the life course. So a lot of my films, the first two films that I made were about, the first one was taking a Nobel Prize story by Alice Munro, who's a Canadian writer, and it's a first-person perspective of dementia, and I'm ruining the film, but it was a radically person-centered narrative about dementia that doesn't have a kind of tragic decline story. And this film, as I mentioned, is about what happens when you have vision loss. So that's the area of horror. It's how we've constructed a whole sort of demographic and allowed it to be horrifying. So why do old people have to take the burden of horror? But you did a great job.
I guess you mentioned Cronenberg, and I think the horror that I'm attracted to is body horror, just generally. And I think just the horror of existing in a body is like the biggest horror.
Yes.
And I do think reclamation is a big part of what I think about when I consume or make specifically horror. That like I was a big fan of kind of everything when I was a kid, splatter, all of that stuff, and I only kind of came to realize not only how problematic it was, but how it shaped some like internalized misogyny for me. And so I guess I always think about putting something back into this culture that I loved so much that I didn't get when I was a little girl. So I think that's something that I always kind of return back to and try to think about the perspective of the person experiencing the horror. I don't know. That's is that word salad?
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's kind of intervening in the narrative and, yeah,
Yeah.
reshaping it, for sure.
Well, the kind of horror films I've always liked are the supernatural horrors. I like everything that has to do with the unknown. And that's why and growing up, in my country, everybody grew up with like American TV. And when people in my country, we don't really have a film industry, but when people make films, they try to make the films they see, the Hollywood films. So I try to change that, and because a lot of our culture gets lost through generations, so I try to keep it alive by like doing something with folklore. So
I think that mental health is a big theme that a lot of my work explores. And with Girl in the Shed, it was quite like inward and straightforward, I think. But I'm actually a bit more interested in like the structures that kind of allow it to be such a big problem at the moment. Like a film I made previously, it was a couple of years ago, it was about a girl who had an obsessive crush on David Cameron, who was our Prime Minister at the time. And he cut a lot of services, and it was like a very bad time. So it's like this whole idea of austerity and like how that affects people's mental health and things like that.
My stuff is sort of changing, but I like to tell like real world like traumatic stuff through fantasy and genre. Like I love doing that kind of things. Like I did a short a few years ago that was like a kid in high school who loves to draw comic books, and then the comic books like kind of appear in front of him, and it just kind of spirals out of control. I like to take from real world stuff and kind of give maybe a bit of, not necessarily magical realism, but just I kind of make it like a bit more fantasy.
I guess this is more of like a practical question in your filmmaking career. I was just wondering, was there a time where you had some kind of difficult thing happen and you had to kind of, filmmaking-wise, you had to kind of, persevere or like resolve it in some way, and like, what was that like, and what was the problem, and how did you actually get through it, or how did you maybe not? In terms of also like, or sexism, but also other, could be just very, anything, like, would just be interesting.
So my first sort of professional directing job, I was a sophomore, and I was making a music video for this woman who I worked at a clothing store with, and she was a musician. She was like, oh, we should collaborate. And I slowly started to realize that I think that she kind of wanted to be the director, and she kind of just wanted my resources. But I ended up working with this male DP who kind of had his own crew of gaffers and grips who he brought with him, and so I didn't have a lot of time to meet the crew before we were on set. And when we were on set, I overheard them sort of talking about how the idea for the music video was stupid. It was with a mannequin, and they were kind of just undermining my, authority as a director. It was kind of hard for me to communicate with them without feeling like they were sort of not respecting my position as a director. And so I would say that my first professional directing experience was not a good one, but ever since then I have really tried to put a lot of care into the people that I choose to collaborate with. And I have a lot of great male collaborators, I do, but I have a lot of amazing women collaborators that I've sort of solidified this nice group of people that I like to work with at school and beyond. And I think I just learned a lot from that experience about, who I want to collaborate with, thinking about it beforehand, and it's gotten much better since then. And I feel like taking control as a director with who I work with, what's happening on set, is something that now I prioritize.
To piggyback off that, I think, something I always tend to do, I have a red book where that on it just says mistakes were made. And I know it's good because I
I write that down after
you write it
every
down,
film.
but also to kind of to let it go, to forgive yourself, but also to remember this thing that you keep not learning. It's very funny to kind of go from production to production to be like, the AD is the most important position. You're always obsessed with your DP and who your production designer is going to be, but the AD runs the entire set. I've written that down
It's the most stressful position.
Right,
I
exactly.
can't imagine the amount of pressure they're under.
No, exactly. Their lives are shorter. Their lifespans are shorter. So that's one thing I kept not learning. I'm going to learn it one day. But I think to your point, about the care that you choose your collaborator, I often find that I struggle, when a collaboration goes south, and they just do sometimes, it's like, I look back and what could I have done differently at the beginning and sometimes you don't know. Sometimes someone's lovely in an interview and then it's just not great on set. But I feel like the biggest thing for me was also trying to set the culture of the film set before. So when I'm interviewing a collaborator, I used to just focus on their artistic merits, and now it's this is the kind of I want to run. This is how I want things to be, and kind of also gauging how this person can, if they can hang with that or if they can't, getting that out in an interview, I think is something that it took me a long time to learn, because the feeling you have of being undermined or being supported completely changes the quality of your ability to do your work. So yeah, I would say that. Vetting people as humans as well as artists.
Very interesting story. Like I said, in my country there isn't really a film industry, so everybody in the audiovisual media business is kind of self-taught. But so now and then, film crews from the Netherlands go to Suriname to make film. And even though I've been working for years, doing camera work and editing work and those kind of things, I never got included to work on the film sets. Well, everybody else, all the guys who didn't even, maybe just started, got included to do anything on the set. And it was yeah, but I also want to experience a real movie set, and I always got excluded from it. And I got the idea that it was because men in Suriname are a bit old-fashioned. So, because I'm a girl, I'm not technical enough, but I have a bachelor degree in chemical engineering, but I'm not technical enough. So, that really motivated me, because if it didn't go like that, if they didn't exclude me from their projects, I wouldn't go and make my own film. And when I started making the series, I think it was about by the second episode, I was kind of gaining respect, and they were starting to include me in projects, and so that's basically one of my experiences in doing film thing.
So Alexandra, the question was, what are some challenges that you face as a filmmaker? You can also introduce yourself now.
Yeah, hi. I'm Serio. Sorry I was late. I got lost. I was coming from a part of the city that I hadn't been before. I think the challenges are, for me, it's usually money and having the opportunity to get money. That's always the challenge, especially when you're starting out with the access to money. I work in New York, so we have a tight-knit community. It's not as big as LA in the United States, so everybody kind of knows everyone, and that's great. But it's smaller, so quality people, they're always booked. There's 2 sound people that I really like in New York. Sound people can be weird in New York, and it really kind of being able to trust the crew that you work with, but it usually comes down to money and time. I really like to do experimental things that I can shoot quickly. My film was shot on an iPhone XS. My film was Tingle Monsters. It was the ASMR horror short, I don't know if anybody saw it, but Yeah, I like to be very nimble, and I really like projects that move the medium of filmmaking forward. Right now is the Oscars, I'm kind of sad that I'm missing it, but not really, because Martin Scorsese's probably going to win, and we know that Martin Scorsese and, you know, Alfonso Cuarón and all these great filmmakers can make a perfect film, but the new guard is what's interesting to me, you know, the people that hold cinema in this like two-dimensional space that is a narrative arc and what a movie should look like, should smell like, should feel like. I believe that that's beginning to change. So yeah, I like to work in mediums that my film is screen time format, so it's supposed to look like a computer screen basically. But yeah, I think it's always time and money, but I like to try to circumvent the time and money part. I gave my DP the script the day of. It's supposed to look like a one-shot. It ended up being three shots stitched together. But yeah, I like to be pretty nimble with that. And then I worked glitch work into the film so that it would look like a seamless edit. So it's kind of forgiving for lag times. It's supposed to look like a live stream. So. But yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges, and the access of money for startup, people that are starting their careers, that's always kind of, filmmaking is an expensive sport. You need all the gear, you need insurance, etc. So programs for the arts. The US isn't the best for arts, Canada is much better, UK is better.
No, we just lost all our,
You did.
we lost our tip program, we lost so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
That's a shame.
Sorry, don't dream about
Yeah.
the 49.
They keep giving money to like the
Yeah.
old guard, like
Yeah.
that's how it works in Canada.
Yeah, the Cronenbergs, etc. Yeah, that's what needs to change, and like new stories, not only the mediums, but obviously the people telling them. They need to share the wealth.
I think for us, sometimes happy mistakes are just a gift from the gods. I mean, if you're not working on a huge scale where you really have a lot of people and you put a lot of money into something, sometimes when something goes wrong, it puts you on your toes. You have to get cut to the nitty-gritty of what a scene is about, the simple truth of the scene. And for us, sometimes when things have gone wrong, it's made our film, you know, in essence. Yeah, so we kind of embrace shitty things. It tends to work out for us. And this isn't a mistake, but this did, I talked about this a little in our Q&A the other day, but right after we began shooting this film, I was diagnosed with a reproductive cancer. And instead of stopping everything, it actually, I think it just heightened our story, and it gave me a more personal take on the writing, and it completely changed things for the better. I mean, it just something like that really does challenge you, but it also makes you stronger. And it cuts out a lot of the bullshit. Suddenly when something like that happens, you know what is fake and what's not in your writing or acting or, yeah, so it sucked, but that wasn't a gift from the gods. But it was something that in the end, I was grateful to have turned around to something positive.
Well, something I think all of us maybe are wondering is what's next for you, like your next project, or what you're excited about, just to...
I decided, because I'm like the nerd in the library that got out of the library, I was on my last film set, someone said, like, you act like a person who's been locked up and you're so joyful. I was like, try 30 years in academia, you know? So one of the things I want to do, I've started to implement, I started a visual storytelling lab at the University of Toronto, so that's funded. So people who, and it's not that I don't think essays are really exciting, but I'm inviting people to tell stories visually. So in my classes and other classes in the English department at my college, we can give you a camera and you can tell your story that way. so that's up and running, so I'm thrilled about that. And the next set of short story, I'm adapting contemporary stories by Canadian immigrants. And so I'm working with a group of students, and we're shooting in an area in Toronto that's often overlooked, so it's called Scarborough Suite. And we're doing 4 short stories with people who have immigrated to Toronto and landed in Scarborough. And the first story I'm doing is by a Laotian writer, and it's called Mani Petty, and it's about a boxer who was a child boxer in Thailand, and he comes to Toronto, and owing to concussions, he can't box anymore. And boxing is a huge way to make money, as you know, in Vietnam and Thailand and Laos. Anyway, so his sister puts him to work in a nail salon, so he becomes an esthetician. Anyway, he moves from the male ring of violence to the female ring, where people inhale chemicals and have miscarriages and lung problems. And so it's another sort of health, humanities, and what happens when these people age as well. So what it's like to work in a nail salon. Anyway, so I'm in pre-production for that, and I'm super excited. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's another kind of horror story. It really is. I will keep in touch for sure. Yeah, and I hear you about money, time. It was crazy. I should have just done some super expensive drugs all my life. This film is the most expensive drug I have ever taken. What are you up to?
Well, after I made this film, this was the last one in the series, I thought, hey, what am I going to do now? I feel like I tried everything I could on my own, so that's why I applied to the University of Arts in the Netherlands. And now it's a full-time, how do you call it? Study?
Yeah,
program?
you're locked in.
Yeah.
You're in the library now.
Yeah. So I don't have much time to work on this project, but I do learn to develop my skills, and we also do make movies in school. So for now, it's just my school projects, I guess.
Take all their money.
I'm working on a doc. It's going to be multimedia. It's going to use a lot of infographics. It's going to be a population that's adjusted for inflation to represent the U.S. and gender discrimination. So it's going to be 100 women's stories, basically. And it's going to use infographics to tell the story. It's going to be a simple questionnaire. The biggest part is finding a statistician to really kind of help me drill down the numbers so that it's representative of the U.S. as a whole. Yeah, I'm in pre-production for that. Very pre-production, let's call it.
We start shooting next month a new feature called Hellbender about a mother who introduces to her daughter their ancient bloodline of women who defied the norms of society, defied the expectations to be mothers, and they've evolved over time to a race of women who are able to procreate on their own. And they bleed in very strange ways, not from... We're having a ball, and it's going to be fun. And the daughter takes it, whereas the mother has thought of it as a curse, the daughter is like, no way, why would you turn your back on those gifts? And so she takes it very far. It's going to be fun.
It's called Birth Rebirth, and it's going to be this Frankenstein-inspired kind of redux. Rose is a pathologist who uses the products from her body to do her experiments, reanimating infants and children, and ends up reanimating the daughter of a maternity nurse who tracks her down, finds her daughter, and they end up co-parenting the child. And as Rose's body stops working the way she needs it to, they have to decide if they want to, or how far they're willing to go in terms of getting these materials from other women. So it's
Wow.
yeah. We're Brendan and my co-writer, and we're currently finalizing the draft, but we're hoping to get it made this year. But I've been saying that for a while, so we'll see.
That's okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I mentioned I'm in pre-production for my thesis film at NYU, which is another coming-of-age horror set in the early 2000s about a young girl who, on her 16th birthday, gets a call from Jessie Jones, who is like Justin Timberlake, Jesse McCartney hybrid, some sort of teenage heartthrob that she's been obsessed with for a long time. And so their phone relationship becomes more and more intimate and then more sinister, and things take very dark turns. And so yeah, I launched my Seed and Spark campaign for that literally 3 days ago. Money and time. Difficult.
What was the campaign, the students?
Seed and Spark is just a fundraising campaign, like, you know, GoFundMe, something like that.
What's the name of it? Maybe.
Seed and Spark, it's actually,
Oh,
Ring Pop. Yes, that's what it's called. I actually proposed to Harry Styles with a ring pop in 8th grade. That's where the story comes from. But yeah, no, talk to me about it afterwards if you're interested in supporting student budgets. Hard.
I've written a feature version of Destruction that I'm trying to make, and it's like The Road meets SLC Punk. That's the kind of vibe. And there's another one that I want to make beforehand with a few of my friends where it's a very specific story to like where I grew up, and I feel no one's going to. There's a haunted bridge in Scarborough, Ontario. And it's a girl was like murdered there, and the movie I want to do, basically, it's about that, but it's basically, what if the first person in high school, the first person you ever fell in love with ended up being a ghost? That's kind of part of it. And then also I'm working on a documentary about my grandfather, who's an Armenian genocide survivor, and I'm going to try to go to Armenia in April and figure that out.
No, I'm just writing a couple of things at the moment, and it's kind of early days. But one is probably going to be a web series, and it's kind of a dark comedy about a pop-up funeral home.
So cool.
It's going to be run by a couple of overprivileged hipsters who's got a bit jealous of their friends' coffee shops and this kind of thing.
Oh my gosh. That is a
So good. I have like an open kind of two-part question. What do you feel are like some of the greater potentials of the cinematic medium in particular, and like how you can tap into those? And also, do you feel like there is a female gaze in horror? And how does that look?
We're all
Wide open.
I'd say like The Nightingale, if you've seen that movie. Yeah, it's incredible. It's really hard to watch, but very good.
Yeah, I think the female gaze in horror really scares people. Because as a woman, you're kind of afraid a lot. And like what you fear is scary. Anytime that you can make a viewer empathize with a marginalized group, and I have to say we're 51% of the population, but I still feel like we are a marginalized group oftentimes. But they tend to be very unsettling, you know, the fears of women, and in a deep, unsettling way. Nightingale's hard to watch. I've never seen I think that was the first film directed by a woman that portrays rape. So I
don't think that's true.
Well, that I've seen, sorry.
Okay.
That I know, and then, that I have personally seen. It's definitely not the first time, but it's the first film that I've seen directed by a woman that portrays rape, and it's not about the rape, you know what I mean? And that's the way that she shot it, and that's the unsettling part.
Yeah, you may have heard that the director was like, there was like a big outrage at some of the first festival screenings.
Yes.
And her biggest critics were men,
Of course.
Like, this was unacceptable, obscene.
She got called a slut by a reporter in Venice, and
Yeah.
she at first thought it was tongue-in-cheek because of the subject matter, and then no, he was bounced. Yeah, absolutely, never happened.
Of course, men have been portraying it forever.
Exactly, yeah.
Consequence, and finally, yeah, a woman has an unflinching gaze at it and is rejected, so.
There's a, and I'm going to be the Canadianist along with my friend, but Margaret Atwood said that men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will murder them.
Have you seen Mandy?
Yeah, I love Mandy.
Yeah, the set of
It's
years.
but that's what happens. A woman laughs at a man and then gets burned alive.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I know. I started out as a women's gender studies prof, and there's just, it's not that I can't be shocked, but yeah, the set of fears and the experiences, and I mean, we're all on a panel where what happens, the films we saw, but what happens when you get your period, and suddenly, I'm Jewish as well. And so when men wake up in the morning, if you're Orthodox Jew, you say a prayer and you say, thank God I was not born a woman. And also when you're Orthodox and you have your period, you're tameh, which is polluted. You can't go to synagogue. So, I mean, there's so much that you, even if it's not necessarily part of your cultural tradition, it seeps in and you just, yeah, so this whole gender division about what is a horror and what do women need to expel and express is going to be quite different, I think. And even though Cronenberg is fascinated with orifices and body horror, and he did Dead Ringers, the perspective, I feel, in the tone is always distinct from what women do with those experiences. Yeah, maybe I need to have a Coke and Pepsi test and say, okay, was this made by a woman? Was this made by Coke? But I do feel like I can sense the difference.
The alienness in Dead Ringers of women's bodies,
Oh,
right?
it's just so
tools for
awful.
operating on mutant women.
Yeah.
I love that movie, but I think, it's so male.
and
And it's
even-
really interesting because it's just about women's bodies.
It's
in
absolutely,
this very
Genevieve Bujold is like, just absolutely kind of, yeah. And someone was asking me about Cronenberg, and I was like, Jeremy Irons is a horror movie. That's all it is. Like, he just brings. Yeah. I was hoping we would talk with you about what horror movies that you like to see, and I was thinking about, like, there's a horror movie with Nicole Kidman. I won't go about Jeremy Irons and Nicole Kidman, but The Others. I found that just so moving. She kills her children. Sorry to ruin the movie. Excuse me.
Maybe like a spoiler warning on the door.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you're all horror veterans, but and she's figuring out that whole trajectory of matricide, and it's incredible. Yeah, I suppose I saw it after I had my kids. So what horror movies do you really like? Tell us. Yeah. What got you here?
Or if anyone else has an answer in the meantime while you're all thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, this is directed by a man, but I think this is, I can't help but think about Midsummer.
Oh, I know, my daughter.
Which, I wonder what it would have been like if it was, but it was still an incredible movie, and I think about that scene at the end with, she's just like screaming with the women around her, and that scene really changed me, honestly, because I feel like as somebody who's been in relationships that are similar to that of Danny and her boyfriend, it was just like such a cathartic moment to see these women just, revel in that anguish with her. I saw it in the theaters and I was like, this is just incredible.
I love horror that elevates the everyday into an hour. Sorry, you close your ears maybe again.
Now we're going to ruin every spoiler.
Midsummer. Too late. Midsummer elevates. I think everybody has had a toxic relationship. I think we all have, man, woman, everything in that spectrum. We've all had a toxic relationship. So elevating horror to say, is this okay? looking at something that everyone has encountered and saying, can we do better? That this is toxic, you know? That's my favorite type of horror. And that movie was amazing because there's not, I saw this with my husband and he was, first of all, very upset that the albino in the movie wasn't the killer. A24 cut the trailer to look like that. So you felt like that was a missed opportunity. It's a very slow burn. But there's not one thing that the male partner in that film really does that is, that really crosses a definitive line. It's such a slow burn, but it's nonetheless toxic. Yeah, my favorite horror does that. I mean, even Parasite, I don't know if it's been released in...
Yeah,
It has,
No, in Europe.
Yeah,
It has, okay. That film, it's not necessarily horror, but it's the allegorical structure. You kind of feel every emotion in that, and yeah, I love that. I love...
My favorite horror is Get Out. Jordan Peele. How many people have seen Get Out? So can we talk about this film? I mean, have you seen it?
Did you like it? You can say you didn't. We can fight.
That's the thing.
Oh, it's so...
Do you see us?
Not yet, don't. But when you have literally ambivalence, film, like the acting in that was phenomenal. Sort of the inability to speak and the desperate need to speak and conform. Oh my God, every graduate student I've ever met.
Even the script is amazing. Like, if you read the script, you could pick up everything. It's so great.
No, that was, hairs on my arms going up. That was so brilliant. Yeah.
We just have about 5 more minutes because our film's going to start at 7.
anyone have any
yeah,
Ask us questions.
And if you're not watching film and people want to stay after and try, that's totally okay. But just wanted to be official and be at 7. Early thoughts on the
I don't know if this speaks to the gays, but something that, and we've talked about it, but I too love menstruation, and I love talking about it, and I love saying things about it. And one thing I think that's interesting, and that I think women bring to the table, whether they have children or not, most of their lives they've bled, you know, and that's visceral. You know, every month we deal with something very visceral. Birth, if you choose to have it, is visceral and violent. And so I think that's in our DNA, that when women make horror films, just having that in our DNA, I think gives us a very interesting perspective and take. It's and I don't want to diminish them by saying it gives us an intelligent take, but there is a certain intelligence I find in horror that's made by women, and I think a lot of it just goes back to the fact that we bleed, you know, and I think it's cool.
To your point, we did a reading, a small closed reading of our Frankenstein movie as we were making it, and had questionnaires, and a male participant who came, wrote, "Does it need to be so violent?" And there's no violence in our film. There is an emergency C-section. There is childbirth.
That's violent.
But there's no violence. Someone shoved someone against a wall, but I don't think that's what he was talking about. And, I think I was actually a little apprehensive because a few of my friends and mentors who are older women who are not necessarily into horror, they were like 50s, 60s, and not, like self-avowed not horror fans came to this reading, and I was kind of scared. I'm like, are you going to hate this? Are you going to think I'm a monster? And they identified with it so much. They were like, yeah, we've lived through this. This is cool that you're talking about it because it's not something that gets out there. And I think in particular we have the opportunity to talk about those unspoken things in this genre. It's really exciting.
Yeah, women are often accused of having penis envy, but I really think that womb envy is a big thing. Like the ability to create life. I mean, Vanessa Jupiter did that great. Hey, nice to meet you. You did that great breakdown of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a queer coming out story. But yeah, I think there's so many we always think that mad scientists that want to create life are gods. but they're women. They want to be women, actually. It's kind of like that, we don't go there because we're not built like that, typically women. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of an interesting facet to that because there's so many megalomaniac. How many films start like that? I want to create life. It's like we do it all the time.
It's also interesting that, there's not, aside from a cramp, let's say, but it must be interesting, I'm just thinking from a male point of view, or maybe historically there was fear and awe that women bled, but there wasn't pain, as opposed to whereas men went out and they had swords and there was violence in their life, and blood was, I think, had a violent connotation of war, whereas women bled every month without pain or death, from menstruation, which I just find really fascinating.
Talk about blood for another 5 hours, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll call the official end here. Thank you all so much for being